So again, a lot of what we're going to do here is stuff that you hopefully remember from 6th and 7th grade, points, lines, and graphs. First, on your little piece of graph paper, you can wait to paste this in if you like, but the first thing I want to do is just go over some vocabulary, then we're on the graph, and then we're going to actually do some graphing on it. So first, somewhere on this graph paper, give yourself an XY axis as neatly as you can. Doesn't need to be perfect since it's just notes. Now, just a reminder, when we are graphing, we are using the lines on the paper as our graph lines. Each one line counts for one. We're not coming in and doing little tiny lines in here to count off. We don't need to. That's the whole point of graph paper. So first of all, remember that the x-axis is the horizontal, the y-axis is the vertical, and that when we have an ordered pair, and we reviewed this briefly yesterday, that it always goes in order x, y, and that's just important because I know you guys know how to plot on the graph. I am confident of that, but still, even knowing how to do it, people sometimes make mistakes because they go too fast, especially when there's a 0 involved. So let's just plot 2 points to start. Let's say we have 0, 3. 0 is the x, which means that we go over on the x-axis 0 spaces. Here I go. Okay, I did it. Everyone see that again? Here I go over 0 spaces on the x-axis with my orange pen. Ready? Go. Done. And then 3 on the y, 1, 2, 3. Right? Now obviously I'm just doing that kind of dramatically, but the point is to think about which direction are you going in. Let's say the other one was -2, 0. -2 is my x value. So on my x-axis, I go in the negative direction 2 spaces, and now I'm going to go up 0 spaces on the y. Here I go. Done. I know, it's exciting, isn't it? So just be careful, especially with the zeros. Those are the ones where I see people making the most mistakes. So just go carefully. You're going to be plotting some points. That's the first part that hopefully is very easy. Then you're going to graph equations. Now, I'd like to use this same grid to graph our equation. I did my first points, just those plain points in orange, so I'm going to do my equation in a different color. If you're using color, this would be a good time to switch. Now, to graph an equation, it's kind of like what we did yesterday, but actually even simpler. You don't have to look for whole numbers. However, plotting fractions is very difficult. It's hard to be accurate. So I'm going to suggest that you try to do like yesterday, where we just had whole numbers, because again, that's going to be a lot easier to graph. So my first equation, 2x minus 3y equals 6. Now, guys, we're going to be doing the chart again. After this, later in the chapter, you're going to learn other ways to graph lines without having to make a chart. That's some of the new stuff. But for now, we're going to stick with this chart since this is the way we've done it. This way always works. Okay? Now, again, we're going to go x and y, and we're going to pick values for x. Again, we want to do something, if possible, that gives us a whole number. I like to start with 0 because that often gives a nice, easy mathematical substitution here. 2 times 0, there's my x, minus 3y equals 6. Now just be careful as you solve. 2 times 0, of course, is 0. 0 minus 3y is just minus 3y. And then we would divide both sides by -3. Be careful because it's a negative. We get y equals -2. Now, I'm running out of room a little bit on my paper here where my graph is, so I'm just going to write over here. You can fit it anywhere on your paper. I'm going to start to list my pairs. So first I've got my 0, -2. Now, you need to get 3 points in order to graph a line. If you only get 2, let me go back to here's 2 points. If you only get 2, you might think it's right, but then you get the third point, and let's say it lands over here. What should my line look like? Pammy? A straight line. So by getting 3 points, if you make a mistake on one, it will usually show up if you do 3 of them. If you only do 2, you can connect any 2 points into a straight line, but they may not be correct. So you have to get 3 points. Now, again, if we try to look for a pattern here, I see 2, 3, and 6. Well, maybe I'm going to try again with some numbers that I think might work. I'm going to be plugging in for x. When I multiply that, I'm going to be subtracting it from 6. Let me try multiple of 3. Let's try 3 for x. 2 times 3 minus 3y equals 6. Now let's say you picked 1 and you ended up with a fraction. You can try to graph that. You just have to be very careful because if it's wrong, it's hard to tell if you get it wrong in fraction form. 2 times 3 is 6. To solve this, I would subtract the 6 first, so don't forget all our steps of how we do equations. We leave the variable alone to start. I have negative 3y equals 0. Divide both sides by negative 3, I get 0. That's fine, 0 is a number. So my next one was 3, 0. Now one other thing you could try on this, 0 is easy to work with usually. When we picked 0 for x, it made some easy math. You could always pick for y and go backwards and find your x. So maybe, and this one we ended up with a 0, but maybe you pick a 0 for y. You go, oh, 0 is easy to work with. I did 0 for x, I got 1, let me plug in 0 for y. And then the exact same thing would happen, except you just plug it in for the y, and you get the value for x and put that over here. If we try to stick with our pattern, in this one again with multiples of 3, let's try 6. Now you could also do negatives. You could do negative 3. It's okay to do negatives for this. But if we stay with 6, I put that in for x. 2 times 6 minus 3y equals 6. 12 minus 3y equals 6. Subtract 12 from both sides. I get negative 3y equals negative 6. 6 minus 12, negative 6. When I divide both sides by negative 3, negative 6 divided by negative 3 makes positive 2. So my final pair, 6, 2. So again, if you can try to do it like yesterday where you look for a pattern and try to find the numbers that will give you whole numbers, positive or negative here, negatives are okay too, then that's going to make it easier to graph. Once you get your 3 points, now I'm going to come back to my same grid. For you guys for your homework, first let me say this. There's going to be one section where you're plotting points. You can do them like this all on one XY axis, one coordinate grid. When you are doing the graphing of lines, I want each one on its own XY axis. Let me say that again. When you are graphing lines, each one gets a chart and each one will get its own little coordinate grid. Within your big piece of graph paper, just make a few different ones, okay? So I plot these points carefully. Now I'm doing mine in blue. The orange ones were those first couple points. So 0, negative 2, I go over 0 and down 2. There's my 0, negative 2. Again, be careful with your plotting. 3, 0, I go over 3 on the x, up 0 on the y. And 6, 2, I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the x, up 2 on the y. I look, that's going to make a straight line. The last step is to connect the dots with a ruler. Do not try to freehand it. Now my ruler didn't go exactly where I wanted it to. I'm kind of underneath the points instead of right through them. Go as accurately as you can. Now guys, one more thing. Notice I added arrows on the ends. And I extended my line beyond the points. I want you to extend your line beyond the points because the line goes infinitely in both directions. That's indicated by the arrows. But by extending it a little past, don't just go to those 3 points and stick little arrows on the end. Go make it longer. It's not hard, you're using a ruler, just go longer. And this will help you to see when I put up the answers on Monday if you got it in the right spot. What if your next point was down here? And what if you had these 3 points? By extending the line, you'll be able to see that it does match up. It doesn't actually matter which numbers you pick for x, your line will be in the same place as everybody else's if you did it right, regardless of what values you picked for x. So I will be showing you a graph like this on Monday and saying, check to see if yours goes in the same direction. Does it cross the x-axis, the y-axis at -2? Does it cross the x-axis at 3? Does it look like it's in this position? If you did it right, it should be in the exact same spot. Now, the last thing I need to show you, this is another quick graph, but we're not going to do it on the graph paper. Let's leave this. I just need to show you a couple other situations that you might encounter with graphs. So we're just going to do a couple quick ones. They don't need to be, bless you, very perfect. Just give yourself somewhere on your page a couple small ones. We're not actually going to do any work. I'm just going to show you what these graphs would look like. If you have just an x, let's say your equation says x equals -2. First of all, you can't make a chart. What are you going to plug in? The only number you could plug in is -2 equals -2. There's nothing else you could plug in for x that would make sense. 0 equals -2? That's not true. So if you only have one variable, you don't need to make a chart. Here's how this works. There's no y values, means this will never touch the y-axis. If it says x equals -2, we go on the x-axis to -2. And if it's never going to touch the y-axis, what that means is this is a completely vertical line. This will never touch the y-axis. It's parallel to it. It will never cross it. There are no y values. A y value means it crosses the y-axis. And this doesn't. So if you get an equation like this, x, it crosses the x-axis at this point. Now, it's exactly the same if you have, let's say the same, but y equals -2. There's no x's because it will never cross the x-axis. If the only variable is a y, you go to the y-axis, that's the vertical one. You go to -2, whatever that value is. Here's my -2. If it's never going to cross the x-axis, that's because it is perfectly horizontal, going through -2. So if you see one of those situations, look at these as a little bit of a hint of what to do, and that's it for today.